We're looking at Mark. You know, we got two parts of Mark. We got two titles. We've talked about that. You know what? We're on week 14, so we've talked about it 13 times. So you know all about that. That we've been dealing with Jesus as the Christ, and then Jesus as Son of God, and again as the Christ. What are some of the things? And Barb isn't here because she's got car trouble.
Yeah, I was going to tell you.
Yeah, she's got car trouble. In fact, she needs a ride tomorrow. For the funeral.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, she needs somebody to pick her up.
Yeah.
Because her car's in the shop. But that's her word, authority. Jesus shows authority. And we looked at, the healing, the casting out demons, all that kind of jazz. Walking on water, feeding, the folks. All of them demonstrate authority. And in the end, evidently, the disciples know it because Peter says, "You are the Christ." So that's for Mark who the Christ is. All right, and now we started the second section where Jesus is talking about how he is the Son of God, but he won't use the title Son of God because he hasn't shown himself to be Son of God yet. He's not going to show himself to be Son of God until Judy, you okay? You got your little book.
It's nothing new.
Yeah, she touched noses with you, which is good. She did that with today with a schnauzer that has he has yellow hair on the top of his head. He's got kind of a yellow mohawk. He has different color mohawks. Yeah, it was yellow today. It's been green. So I don't know if she's impressed with him. I have no idea. But okay, so he's now talking about how he's Son of God, and so he's going to use the title Son of Man until crucifixion, because he's not going to claim that title for himself. Because again, people would misunderstand what Son of God means until he's actually done what's necessary for him to do. So that's, in terms of structure, that's what we've got. In terms of characters, we've got some characters mentioned. And what are the characters that we've seen in Mark?
The Pharisees, the crowd, and the disciples.
Yeah, you got Pharisees, crowds, and disciples, and the Pharisees and scribes. And now we're going to add to them who else? Who else are we going to put in with the Pharisees and the scribes?
The
Herodians
and the Sadducees.
And the Sadducees. And the Herodians are political. They're the people who are supporting King Herod, who isn't a Jew. So that's not a Jewish group. It's just supporting, him. So you've got, those are all together. And their attitude towards Jesus is? Negative. Okay? And then you got the disciples, and boy, they jumped up and followed him when he called, and that sounded great, although we really didn't understand a whole lot. And now what is our impression of the disciples?
They still don't get it.
They don't get it, and they seem to be, kind of going backwards. Sometimes when you follow a team and you're watching, and they seem to be getting better, and then all of a sudden they start getting worse.
Yeah.
All of a sudden they're getting worse, and these disciples seem to be getting worse. Because, they're doing things that are just stupid, just dumb. But they're still there and still with him. And then you've got sort of the wild card, the crowds. And what makes the crowds kind of a wild card?
Because you don't know which way they're going.
We don't know which way they're going. Now, one group that we've talked about, they seem to think the crowds are going in one direction. Which group is that think they know where the crowd stands?
The Pharisees think that they're going with Jesus.
Yeah, the Pharisees.
They don't want to do anything to him until after the crowd isn't there.
Yeah, because they're scared. Mark tells us they're scared of the crowds. Mm-hmm. So the Pharisees, it's inhibiting their actions because they're scared of the crowd. So they think they know, but to this point, the crowds are just sort of in the background. Okay, now, we've got Jesus. Where is Jesus now?
He's in Jerusalem.
Okay, he's in Jerusalem. Enter Jerusalem. In Mark, not with the same kind of fanfare we see in the other three Gospels, but certainly more modest, because it's not the whole city, like in Matthew and Luke, where the whole city comes to grief. Mark doesn't say that. He's just got disciples in front, disciples behind. And they're chanting the things that people do when they went to the pilgrims chanted when they went to the temple. So it's important because he's doing a symbolic act, riding this donkey, which kind of reminds people of Zechariah, what Zechariah said. But it's not nearly as spectacular as what we see in John, when he comes in and they're doing poems and things. So, but he's in Jerusalem. Last week we talked about him, what he was teaching in the temple. And what were some of the things that he taught? And he kind of went through different groups. And it's like he knocked them down. Talked to one group, knocked them down.
You mean like the money lenders and different things like that? Is that
Well, yeah, he was talking to, first he kind of cleanses the temple. And we said that was sort of a symbolic act. It was less practical and more symbolic because you can't cleanse the entire temple. You can't chase all the animals out. One person couldn't do that. It's a big place. Somebody put a net on him before he could do that. So it was more symbolic than anything else. And what did we say they were doing symbolically? What was he doing symbolically with the temple? And remember that cleansing of the temple was one of those inclusion stories that was in the middle of another one with the fig tree. And what were we saying?
Maybe
the temple,
a place for worship.
Yeah, that it was supposed to be a place for worship, but it had become a hideout.
Yeah.
A hideout for the Pharisees. It had ceased to bear fruit. It was no longer in season, and so it was this whole temple worship is withering, sort of withering on the vine like the fig tree, and so temple worship is going to be done. We're moving beyond this temple worship. It was never intended to be what they had made it anyway, or it had kind of become a perversion of what it was supposed to be. And last week we talked about him teaching and in the temple, and it's all kind of related to what he had, the symbolic act, that cleansing. And he told some parables. Remember, he gave the parable about. And we're looking at the 12th chapter.
The woman with the money, her money.
Oh yeah, the woman with the poor
coin,
woman with the little coin, and she puts in all that she has, and the rich people are putting in more money, and that impresses folks as it would impress me, but because the values of the kingdom are different. The values of the kingdom are different. That woman put in all that she had. And so that's what he focused on, which is radically different than how people then and now think.
You wonder how she would earn any money.
Right.
Right. What she does to get any money.
A widow woman then, you're in big trouble.
Yeah.
You're in big trouble. So we did that. We had another parable about the vineyard. And how the vineyard was going to be passed on to somebody else because the current, the tenants weren't, they weren't treating it, weren't paying their rent, and so they were going to go, and we saw Jesus dealing with Sadducees, the Pharisees about tax money, should you pay taxes, and he said, Give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and Caesar, his image is on coins. So the coins belong to him, but you bear the image of God, you belong to God. So you give to God what belongs to God, you give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. It's no big deal. The Sadducees try to ask him a really stupid question about marriage later, which is to make the resurrection look foolish. And he says, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. That's not the way, life is and the kingdom to come, and so step back, and then the greatest commandment, another one comes up and says, what's the greatest commandment, the first and the most important? And he says, love God, love neighbor. And he says those are the two. He says the first one is love God, and the second one is love neighbor. And if you do that, you're kind of doing what God wants you to do. Okay, so he's done that, and in the end, as he goes through these parables, they end up what's the response of the opposition as he knocks down
They don't ask him any more
they don't ask him any more questions.
Yeah,
They stop asking him questions, and then he says that thing about David, which is a little complicated, that he couldn't.
David called him Lord.
Yeah, so the Messiah can't be the son of David because David calls him Lord, and so it can't be his son because clearly he must exist before and fathers would call their sons. If that's meaningful to you, God bless you. It's not one of the stronger things that you see. I wouldn't preach a sermon on it, but bless their heart, it's there. And it is making a point. Okay, so we've got Jesus there, has done this at the temple. When we come to the end of chapter 12, what is the situation of the opposition? Because chapter 12 is him dealing with those who oppose him, that one group that really dislikes him, wants to kill him. What's their situation at the end of chapter 12?
They just kind of faded away.
Okay, they kind of faded away. Although they're not
done.
They're not done. So it's not like they've disappeared, vanished, left the story. They
went
won't
into
act.
hiding and
Yeah.
figure out something.
Well, that's right. And why won't they act?
Because of the crowd.
Because they're afraid of the crowds. Okay, so they're going to act. Eventually they're going to find out they didn't need to be afraid of the crowds, but
Not yet.
that's coming up later. Okay, so we get in 13, and chapter 13 in the Gospel of Mark is always considered a little different, because in it, the language, and we'll talk about that once we kind of dig into it, the language is radically different than we see in other parts of Mark. Now, it's certainly written by Mark. The same hand wrote chapter 13 that wrote chapter 12. Because the vocabulary is the same, but he's using images that you don't see in Mark, and it reflects a very definite style that was popular in the first century and before, and we'll talk about that. So the chapter 13 of Mark is a little unique, kind of is almost set apart a little bit. Okay, now at the beginning, when we get into chapter 13, what's the situation? What's happening at the beginning?
They were leaving the temple.
Okay, they're leaving the temple, which tells us, again, this is a technique Mark has used before. What does that tell us when he's leaving someplace?
He's changing what he's talking about.
He's changing what he's saying. Yeah, he's changing. It's telling the reader that we're going to talk about something different. We are no longer going to talk about what we were doing in chapter 12. We're going to a new topic because he's going to a new location. Now, we don't know where he's going yet, but we find out in verse 3. Because they're leaving, they're going out from the temple. Where are they heading towards?
Mount of Olives.
The Mount of Olives. And the Mount of Olives become important because later in the story, what's going to happen at the Mount of Olives?
That's where he's going to pray.
That's where he's going to pray.
That's where he's going to be taken.
So the Mount of Olives is going to play a role in the crucifixion. In the story, we don't know that, but Mark does, and the reader, we know the story. It hasn't been introduced in the gospel yet, but remember, we, the reader, know the end of the story. So this is sort of I think Mark reminding us that we are getting close to the end. We're getting close to the end. Okay, so he's with, and this is something related to the crucifixion. And when you read, or that end, when you read what they end up asking him, it really does have a lot to do with Jesus sort of leaving the scene. Okay, now who speaks as he's there? The disciples are with him. Who speaks?
Peter, James, John, Andrew.
Well, he said, what are they doing as they leave in the temple? What are they doing? As they leave the temple.
Commenting about the stones.
Commenting about the stones. The stones, and so what are they commenting with respect to the stones? The building is great. Yeah. And understand, it is a pretty great building. It's taken Herod the Great, the old man, started the temple. They've worked on it for 40 years. And the sad part is the temple's going to be completed, and then immediately going to be destroyed by the Romans. As soon as they finally cut the ribbon to the temple, they're going to rebel against the Romans. Romans won't tear it down. That's what's going to happen. So, and evidently, Mark is writing to an audience that maybe knows that just after the destruction of the temple, because he talks about the temple being destroyed, something that would make sense if Mark's audience knew it. Mark's people knew it. Okay, so they're admiring the stones, how impressive the temple is. Now, when they admire the stones, how impressive the temple is, as the reader, what has Jesus in the story already said about the temple?
There's going to be destroyed.
Well, yeah, the temple's going to be destroyed, and
The stones are
Lord,
no longer-
he chased the money changer. The
Not
whole
doing what
purpose
it's
for the
supposed to anymore.
yeah, the purpose of the temple isn't the same anymore. The temple's not going to serve a purpose. Therefore, this impressive building is almost irrelevant, because the focus is no longer going to be on the temple that has been misused anyway, has kind of drifted away from what it was intended to be, house of prayer for all people, and become a place where religious folks hide out. So the building is almost irrelevant. And Jesus kind of says the building is irrelevant when he says what? About these impressive stones.
That they will no longer be thrown down.
Okay, that it's going to be absolutely, in fact, it's going to be thrown down to the point that what?
No stone is left on another.
No stone is going to be left upon another. And in Greek, there are two words that refer, me and ne, refer to the negative, when you make something negative. And when you use both of them together, it means an emphatic negative, and that's what he uses here.
Now, how would they use, what kind of a way would they use those words?
It would just be thrown into it would be in a sentence.
Okay.
Just like we would say no or not.
Oh, okay.
But that's why it's translated most of the time absolutely not, because it is emphatically no. You're using both the negatives in one sentence, and you don't usually do that, but it means absolutely not. In Greek, there's some interesting things, like usually the pronouns are part of the verb. The pronoun, you, I, you, them, because of the verb. When they add a pronoun to, now it's emphatic. When it says, like in the passage we looked at Sunday, when it says I, but they've included the pronoun to, imu, the pronoun for I, but you've got that in the verb. That means emphatically I myself will be with you. Nobody else. So he's making it an emphatic about himself. That's how Greeks made things. And I assume they still do. That's how you make it emphatic. And that's what he's used here. So
It would be really nice if the English language wasn't so wishy-washy, and when you said, this is the way it is, this is the way it is, and not leave room for questions.
Yeah, we would do the same thing by saying absolutely. Absolutely not. No way. Or Greeks, the way they can phrase a question, you can phrase a question that will imply a negative or positive answer. And we do the same thing. You're not going to the store, are you? Well, the answer I want isn't, yeah. I want you to say, no, I'm not going to the store. You're not going to go out with him. No.
Yeah.
If you say yes, then that's not implied in the question. You want a negative answer. And Greeks, there's a way they structure sentences to get that answer. So they're not asking for information. They're really making a statement. But here, so it's an emphatic no, absolutely no stone will be on top of one another, which just reinforces what he's already said. What has he already said? What has he already done? Maybe more important than what he said. Well, he said it in the parable. What is that suggesting?
He's giving it to another.
This is what you have counted on in the past is no longer going to be here. We are going to move on. We're going to turn the page. Okay, and so really not any different than what he's already said. This Jewish worship is changing. Okay, now when he gets to the Mount of Olives, which again is opposite the temple, because he wants to remind us that he's just left the temple and he's some other place. Who is there?
James, John,
Peter,
Peter,
And Andrew. Finally, Andrew breaks in. I think the fact that it's 4 is relatively important because 3 is a perfect number, 4 is a 3 number. So I think they're talking about something involving the earth. And that's why he has 4 of them there. But it's that inner core, the first 4 called. And what do?
When is this going to happen?
Okay, they ask him a question, right? And they say, when is this going to
Be fulfilled.
occur? Yeah, when is this going to be fulfilled? When is this going to be accomplished? Now, what do they want?
A sign.
They want a sign. Because they even say it. They say, what signs are going to occur that's going to indicate that this is going to be happening? Now, when we look at the word sign, other people he's talked about signs before. Mark has talked about signs before in his gospel. Who is it that wanted signs? Approached Jesus and wanted a sign?
The Pharisees, they wanted a sign that he was the Son of God.
Yes, that he had authority to do that. Yeah. The Pharisees had wanted signs, right? And he's also said that false teachers are going to come with signs. So if you're seeking a sign, is that a good thing?
No, it's not.
It's not.
You don't believe what's going to happen unless you have something to say, oh yeah, he said that would happen.
Right. So it's not the fact that they're saying, Jesus, give us signs. We, the reader, are not looking at that question. Oh, that's a good question. I'd like to know that myself. You don't ask for signs. I mean, that's what the Pharisees asked for. That's not good. That's what false teachers give, are signs. That's not good either. So these 4 disciples are not being portrayed in a positive light here as the reader based on how he's used signs before. So we don't want to be drawn into, that oh yeah, I have that question too. Jesus says don't. You don't want to have that question. Okay? But it makes sense that they would ask it, right? Because what do they want to know?
When the temple's going to be.
Yeah, they want to know when this is going to happen and what would that enable them to experience if they know when.
They can be prepared for
Okay.
it.
They can be prepared.
Do whatever they need to do.
Now,
But why do you wait?
It's also it's also interesting. It may show us something about what's going on in Mark's church. Because remember, this whole gospel is being written to a church. And therefore, if issues come up, it's probably issues that are going on where?
In the Mark's church.
In Mark's church, in the church in which the gospel was being sent. And the fact that they would say, what signs can you give about this, may indicate that what might be occurring in Mark's church.
There's a little bit of doubt going on.
Oh, there's a little bit of doubt going on. And how would a smart minister seek to solve that doubt?
Well, if you saw this happening, then you got.
Yeah, boy.
If you saw that happening, you got to do.
Let me give you a diagram.
Yeah.
Let me show you the signs, right? That maybe there are folks in Mark's church, which fortunately we don't deal with anymore because nobody talks about the end of the world in science anymore. There are people who have made a living for 50 years writing books on science. Yes. Oh, absolutely. From the late great planet Earth right on. That the end of the world is going to. I had a conversation with somebody last week, and they said, well, with everything going on, clearly, we are almost at the end. The end is almost here. And I said, well, we could be. But would you do me a favor? If you're wrong, would you say you're wrong? Would you say that you were wrong?
What they say.
Absolutely nothing. Would you say that you made a mistake? You don't have to beat your chest. You don't have to just say that you made a mistake. I said, I'll tell you if I'm wrong. I don't have a problem with that. But if you're wrong, would you say you're wrong about the end of the world? Mm.
When we were talking about the disciples and he's still asking questions and wanting signs, from the very beginning when Jesus asked them to follow him, even then, I don't know what in them made them just drop everything and go. Mm-hmm. And they questioned from the very beginning, all through their time with Jesus.
Yeah.
Right. They questioned him and they weren't sure and they're.
kind of go in two different directions, though. If they say, follow me, I'll drop everything and follow him.
Yeah.
But then immediately, well, what's he talking about?
Yeah.
You think
Exactly.
they would, they kind of put that aside.
Yeah.
But they don't.
No.
And I think, we've talked about that before. One of the things I think Mark does in his gospel is when he starts mentioning disciples, one, he does not want us to view these guys as superheroes, or perfect by any means, which is dangerous. When you start viewing human beings as perfect,
Yeah.
you got problems. You may have problems. You may accept a lot of stuff that you shouldn't. And he didn't want us to see them as heroes. But he also, when he's talking to disciples, that's kind of the indication that we may want to perk up our ears. Because we're not perfect either. And maybe we want to listen to what he's got to say. When he pulled the disciples aside, tells a parable, nobody understands what it means, and he says, let me explain to you what it means. We kind of perk up our ears and listen. So when he starts talking to disciples, we can identify with them. Maybe both their strengths and their weaknesses. Maybe that's part of what Mark wants us to do, to realize maybe we're not as smart and as spiritual as we think we are.
Of course we're not.
Yeah, which might be a valuable lesson, for us. Okay, so they ask him for signs, right? And what does Jesus, how does he respond?
Don't let somebody deceive you.
Well, it's interesting, too. I say everything is interesting. There's a lot of interesting stuff in it. What word does he use? When we're looking at verse 5, because he begins to say to them, and which means if he's beginning to say, we should brace ourselves for what? If he says, Mark says he's beginning to talk to him, what does that probably mean?
We should be listening.
We should be listening to him, and he's going to be talking for a while. It's not just a one-liner. He's going to be talking for a while. And so he begins to talk to him, and what's the first word he uses?
Watch out.
Watch out. Now, it's really interesting.
Beware.
Yeah, good. Because in the English translation I'm looking at, guess how many times he's going to use that word?
Watch out. Or beware.
Just take a wild stab at how many in this chapter times he's going to say. Actually not. What number has played a big role in Mark?
Verse 7.
3.
Is that
3.
Yeah, 3.
And what's interesting is the word he uses is the Greek word for look. That's all it is. It's look. But it's used as an imperative. So it's not just, that's right. Pay attention. Unfortunately, in the English translation I'm using, the same word is used 3 times. Boom, boom, to start. And I think that's important because he talks about 3 different areas where you should be looking out. But for some reason they say watch out here, and then the next time it says beware, and then the next time it says watch out. But it's the same word. It's not 2 different words. It's the same word that Jesus uses. And Mark, I think, uses that to separate this into 3 little mini conversations. I'm talking about this, I'm talking about this, and I'm talking about this. Okay, so he says, look out, or beware, or watch out, right?
You must be on your guard.
Okay, that's right. And so you better be on your guard. And what does he say is going to happen?
They would be handed over to local council.
Well, even before that.
Oh.
Because this is
It's that you're not deceived.
But the first thing, okay, there's going to be a problem. There's going to be, watch out, there are going to be people that are going to try to...
Claim to be him.
Yeah, deceive you. And by claiming. And what are they going to say?
That
I am he.
They're going to say, a go on me. They're going to say, a go on me. That's Greek. A go on me. And a go on me means, I am. A go on me, I am. Now, why would some people be saying, I am?
I am is God's name.
That's the name of God. A go on me is a Greek name for God. That's what God said from the burning bush.
Yep,
Moses asked, what's your name? And he said, a go on me. And so when you see a go on me, when you see I am, and that's an emphatic I myself am, because he uses the pronoun and the verb. A me is I am, but a go is I. So a go on me means I myself am. And so people are going to be coming and claiming to be
him.
And when you say I am, you're not only claiming to be him, you're claiming to be
The Father.
Son of God.
You're claiming to be God. So there are going to be people that are going to claim to be God. Now again, let's think about Mark's church. What must be happening in Mark's church?
You have these people saying that I'm the same as God.
Yeah, I'm the same as God, or that I'm the same as God. Could be God is talking to me. There's a direct line between me and God. And it's from God's mouth to my ear through my mouth. And so I am speaking for God. I have God's wisdom and I have God's power. And what are those people going to do? What are those people who are running around claiming to be God or claiming to be God's spokesman? They are going to deceive. Watch out, because they're going to deceive you. These guys that are running around claiming to speak for God, they're going to deceive you. Then he starts talking about, like in verse 7, what are these disciples going to hear? As these guys are in there saying, look, I got it. I got it straight from God. What are the disciples as they look out at the world? And I think all of this is dealing with the world.
All kinds of conflicts.
Oh man, you're going to see all kinds of stuff. You're going to see wars, and you're going to hear rumors of wars, right? Mm-hmm. Now, again, kind of tells us what these guys are claiming to be God, or having God's wisdom. Kind of tells us what they're saying, right? What are these guys telling?
That you should fight this and you should fight that.
Yeah, or maybe fight, or it may be there are wars coming. This must mean what?
That's the end.
The end. The war's coming. This has got to be the end. Prepare yourself for the end. Because that's what they're going to say. They're going to point out and look at all those wars going on out there. We got to be close to the end, right? What does Jesus say to them?
Not yet.
Don't be troubled. Don't be troubled. Don't be troubled. Why should they not be troubled?
Because we always have war.
We always have to. And that's what
It's not the end yet.
That's right. It's going to happen. It is not the sign. It is not. They wanted signs. It ain't a sign. It ain't a sign. It's not the end. It's not. We're not there yet. Why is it not the end yet?
Because Jesus hasn't completed his...
Well, but what does Jesus say? Yes, you're right. But what does Jesus say? Why it's not the end? How do you know that's not the end? When you see when you hear rumors of war, when you see wars breaking out, how can you be sure that this is not the end? Donna, what did you say just a little while ago?
Because you always have
Because
war.
it always happens. Jeez Louise, you're saying you're going to look at war. The war in Ukraine. That must be the sign of the end. As opposed to, let's see, World War I, World War II, Korea, and the constant, the 20 years of wars we've been in, none of those count. This is the one.
Yeah. Well, there's been wars all through.
There's always wars.
Yes, there's always.
And you know what else there are? Not only are there wars, but what else?
Nation against nation.
There are nation against nation. There are earthquakes. There are tidal waves. There are famines. If you want to get right down to it, those things are birth pangs. Birth pangs. This is not. We're not coming to the end. We're much closer to what? If they're birth pangs, it's the beginning. We're not at the end yet. So we are not even
he says that in here,
close.
too.
Yeah.
These are the beginnings of birth pains.
Okay. I think he's talking about what's going on in the world. And again, if we look at what he's saying to those disciples, the disciples in this story are doing what? Because he's telling them things that, he's like answering questions they really don't have. Because he's still there with them. They don't know about the cross is coming. Mm-hmm. He's predicted it, but they're clueless. Yeah. So he's telling them, but it does resonate with who? Who?
Mark's church.
Yeah, Mark's church. And Mark's church and
Us.
us, our church. You know, every church that's existed since Mark's church, it resonates with us. You know, because this becomes a message for us. Be careful how you interpret the world, events in the world. Be real careful, you know, because what you're looking at has always been. Now he kind of shifts, I think, in verse 9, because he moves from what's happening in the world to what?
What's happening locally?
What's happening locally, right? You know, what all politics is local. He starts talking about what's local, right? And again, he uses the word.
Beware.
Look, only same word. You know, they translated beware, but it is the same word in Greek he used before. So he says, beware that you don't misinterpret the happening in the world. Beware that you don't misinterpreting what's happening to who? To you. What's happening to you. Because what's going to happen to you?
They're going to be called before councils.
Oh, Lord have mercy.
And
It ain't good. You're going to be called before councils. You're going to be
Flogged in the synagogue.
in the synagogues. You're going to stand before governors and kings,
Yeah.
okay, because of me as a testimony to them.
Yeah.
Now, again, as he goes through this, we get a good glimpse right here at what Mark's church must be facing. Because he wouldn't say this if Mark's church weren't facing what?
Persecution.
From who?
The government and the church itself.
Principally who is in Mark's time, who is principally persecuting Christians?
Oh, the Jews.
The Jews. You're going to be called in front of
Religious
councils,
leaders,
which is a
yes.
Jewish church, and you're going to be flogged in the synagogue. So Mark's church, we're not talking about a time when the Romans are persecuting the church. Yeah, because they're not going to. That's not going to happen for another 20 years. After Mark's gospel, it's going to be a while before the Roman government starts. Christians are just not important enough for the Romans to worry about. But the Jews are. And so Mark's church must be facing a lot of pressure coming from the Jews. And then he says, so that's good. Again, just like wars, just like earthquakes, just like famines, guess what? If you're a Christian,
You're going to be persecuted.
that's
You're
going to
gonna be
happen.
persecuted.
Don't assume that the end is here.
Persecution is the end.
The persecution is the end. Don't make that assumption. Beware that you not make that assumption.
Jesus kind of keeps his disciples, how do I want to say it? Because they question, you know, and they didn't really question when they first went with him. For some reason,
Right.
they just went.
Right.
But, you know, he gives the parables and it still makes them question what's going on,
Right.
you know. And,
That's right.
I don't know, just, you would think being with him and seeing what he's done and what he's teaching, they would have a little bit more faith in what's going to happen.
Shelley, that's a great point. Why would Mark be really careful not to do what you're suggesting the disciples would have experienced? Why would he not present the disciples in that way? Why would Mark? Now, understand, Luke does. That's exactly what Luke does. You know, because the disciples, the 12, are going to be the foundation of the church. And, you know, Peter's doing these great miracles in Acts. And so is John. And, of course, Paul takes the gospel. So, you know, in Luke, it's a whole different thing. You know, they're the foundation of the church, the pillars of the church. But Mark doesn't do that. Why do you think Mark would do that? What might be his motivation in not presenting the disciples as people who are more spiritual or know more or less question?
Because none of us are perfect.
Okay.
And we all ask questions because we don't understand.
Exactly. You look at Mark's church, and by having him do that, what Mark does to his gospel, what he's telling those poor little Christians in his church is, you know something? You got questions? Let me tell you the questions the guys that were with Jesus had. You know, let's look at what they were asking. So what you're asking is not nearly as big a deal to you. You know, well, I've had just been with Jesus. They were with Jesus and didn't have a clue. You know, you were only basing your faith on what you've heard and the Spirit working in you, and you were way ahead of them. You wouldn't do some of the boneheaded things they did. And they were with it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, John's going to do the same sort of thing, only he's going to bring the Holy Spirit into it in the Gospel of John. That's the whole thing with Thomas. The Thomas doubts because he wasn't there when they received the Spirit. So of course he doubts because they don't know. Well, Jesus says, understand, when I'm going, the Spirit's going to convey to you everything I taught. So don't think you got some great advantage being with me. The Spirit's going to give you everything you need. So it's really interesting how you've got these two strains used by different evangelists that are moving in slightly different directions. I think both are kind of important for us. Because if you've got questions and doubt, and you make mistakes, man, you ain't made any mistakes like Peter. I mean, you didn't do, you're much better than Peter, in the story.
Yeah.
Because Peter's a jerk. I mean, he really is. At the end, when he denies him, whew, that's a mess. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it quite so blatantly,
Do you think it could possibly be to make sure that the Mark's church doesn't listen to the writings of the apostles more than the words of Jesus?
Absolutely.
Because
Absolutely.
the focus should always be on God.
Absolutely.
And sometimes you hear about, well, this great writer said this and this great writer said that. So where the focus is taken away from God when you do that.
Absolutely.
So you have, by making the disciples ask these silly questions, the same ones you ask, you don't look to some man to be the authority.
I think so. And I'll tell you, I think we see that working out in Paul's letter to the Galatians when he's facing opposition in the Galatian church from people from Jerusalem, Christians that are far more connected to Judaism than Paul, comes to the Galatian church and says, well, what Paul taught you is fine, but let me teach you how to improve.
Yeah. Well, it also has, I'm of Peter, I'm of Apollos,
Right.
I'm of Paul.
Right. What he says in Corinthians.
And you have that. It's Jesus we look to.
Exactly. Well, you were talking about don't look at the writings. Paul will say in the Galatian letter, let me tell you my background. I had this experience on the Damascus Road, and after that, you know what I did? I went to Arabia for 4 years. I didn't go to Jerusalem. I didn't take the, a correspondence church course in Christianity. I didn't go to Peter and say, teach me everything you know about Jesus. I went to Arabia and communed with God. And Jesus taught me in Arabia all by myself. And in fact, I didn't even visit Jerusalem until after I'd gone through that, and then we could sit down and have a conversation. But I didn't come to learn. I came to share. And that's what Paul says. And so I think Paul is working the same sort of thing Mark is.
Yeah.
Be real careful when you start saying, well, Peter said it. Well, John said it. Got to be true. Be real careful because your focus is where?
On the man.
On the man and
God.
Not the God. And so, and when you look at what he's saying here, again, it makes a whole lot more sense to Mark's church than it does to these guys. Because they ain't been called in front of councils yet or beaten in synagogues, but that's going to happen. What else does he say? So, this is going to happen. What does he say about the good news?
Just tell what the Spirit tells you to say.
Lord have mercy. It's got to be proclaimed to all nations, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when they
haven't gotten it yet, so it can't be for them to say it.
Because what's the good news? What is the good news?
They don't know.
That's right, they don't know yet, because we haven't gotten to the crucifixion and resurrection. Because the good news is about Jesus, who is the Christ, and they know Jesus is the Christ, but it's also about Jesus as
The
Son of God, and they don't know that yet.
Yeah.
So the gospel has got to be proclaimed, verse 1. And what assurance as they face, which again tells us maybe what Mark's church is facing, Christians in Mark's church is facing. What assurance when they end up being turned over to the councils and be brought up into the synagogues and haul before governors, what assurance do they have? What hope can they hang on to?
Jesus is the
The
Christ.
words will be there.
The words are going to be there. The Holy Spirit's going to give you the words you need. So you don't have to worry. Maybe you don't need to read that book, because the Spirit's going to give you words. Okay? But what else can they expect?
The families will disintegrate.
Families are gonna break apart. You brothers are gonna betray brothers. Fathers are gonna betray their children. They're gonna be put to death. They're gonna be hated because of Jesus. Now again, I can imagine disciples would hear this and do this. Huh?
Yeah.
Huh? But who isn't saying huh? Mark's church. Mark's church isn't saying huh. Mark's church is saying,
we're doing this.
yeah, boy,
it's happening.
that is exactly what's happening. And that's why we think the end is going to be tomorrow. Because my daddy has turned me in to the Jewish authorities, therefore Jesus is going to come and save me.
It was like the war with Germany and the Jews. They turned, brother against brother.
Absolutely.
All exactly the same as what's going on here.
Well, good night. You look at the Christians in Germany, and I've used that a lot in conversation. The German Christian movement in the 1930s, which was the Nazi church, but they had crosses, and they had ministers, and they were Christian, and they talked about Jesus. But it was a Nazi church, and that's why Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the great theologian, who could have stayed in Switzerland but didn't, nice and safe like Karl Barth, could have spent the war in Switzerland and not been bothered. He didn't. He was involved in what was called the confessing church, and what happens to Dietrich Bonhoeffer? Hung with piano wire. Ooh. So after the assassination attempt, he was one of them that was brought in. And, relatively young man, great theologian. But so not only were they happening to Jews, Christians were facing it too.
Yes.
When they said, you can't be a Nazi. You can't be a Nazi and a Christian. That's the not Heidelberg Catechism, the Theological Declaration of Barmen. You can't be a Nazi and be a Christian. You can't. You got to choose.
We're experiencing it now, even with COVID. It's splitting families.
But Jesus is saying, good. But Jesus would say what to you?
Just stand firm.
It ain't the end. It ain't the end. Don't let somebody stand up and say, we're at the end. Send me all your money because you won't need it soon.
Anymore.
And I don't want to pick on him, although I will. I remember so clearly Hal Lindsey, because it was a big deal in the 70s when I was a young person. But I remember he was on Donahue sometime in the 90s. And it was after another one of his books. He published another book on the end of the world. And I couldn't take my eyes off his watch during the interview. Because that was one nice watch. and as he was talking about the end of the world, I was thinking, well, why would he have such a nice watch if the world is really ending? Why wouldn't he give the watch, sort of like at the end of Schindler's List? When he says, this pen is made of gold, I could have saved more. Why would he buy a watch that expensive? And then why would he be selling his books? Why wouldn't he be giving them away? Because money doesn't
You can't take them.
mean anything.
Yeah.
If you really believe it's the end, why wouldn't you just be taking your money and printing them for free? It was like one of those epiphanies, that I just couldn't take my eyes off of this watch he had on. It was so nice,
You like watches.
And I like watches.
You like
Yeah, I like watches. So anyway, thank you. We talk about that. All right. So the bad things. What else is going to happen? That's really bad. We got families betraying families. We got you're being dragged in front of the synagogue. You're being beaten up. What else is going to happen?
They're going to desecrate the temple.
There's going to be some kind of desecration. Now, what it is, I don't know what it is because they're going to tear it down. Now, what's interesting though is when he starts talking about this, his language shifts a little bit, the language used. And we'll talk about it in just a minute. And what's going to happen when they set up this desecration? Ooh, sounds a little different.
Gotta get out of Jerusalem.
You got to get out of Judea. And where are you going?
The mountains.
You're going to the mountains. Why would you go to the mountains?
Be closer to God.
Closer to God. Thank you, Alan. You're going to be closer to God. And a lot of this stuff is going to occur. Now, what he shifts into, and it talks about a lot of suffering and days being cut short, what he is shifted into is a kind of writing style. And he goes on, false prophets being revealed, right? All this stuff. And then, like in verse 24, he talks about what is in verse? The sun is going to be darkened, and the moon's not giving light, and stars are going to fall, and the Son of Man is going to be coming in the clouds, and all this jazz. What we're looking at here is a kind of writing style called. Does anybody know the writing style that he slips into? It's called apocalyptic. It's called apocalyptic. And it's a style. I'm telling you, it's a style of writing. If you want to see the textbook example of apocalyptic writing style, you look at the book of Revelations. Revelation, not Revelations. Revelation. I said Revelations. You look at the book of Revelation. That's apocalyptic. It is a writing style. It is never meant, it was never meant to be taken literally. It was a highly symbolic style that excited people. The Jews would write apocalyptically. They would use the style. Pagans would use the style. Christians would use the style. It was a writing style. Sort of like, poetry. It's a writing style. And so we don't want to, because in the last 250 years we've become rational. 250 years.
Really?
Reason has become important. Truth is defined by reason, not by anything else. Reason. You don't want to take reason and start reading apocalyptic literature because it wasn't meant to be reasoned out. There's a lot of symbolic images in it. That's why when you read Revelation, dragons have a certain number of horns on their head and wearing crowns on their horns, and it's all symbolic style. You don't read and say, "Oh, that's a helicopter." That's not. It's not meant to be literal. It's meant to be symbolic language, and it's always written. Apocalyptic language is always used in a certain situation. It's when things have become so bad that the only hope people have is God intervening. Things are so bad, we're doomed unless God comes and wipes the slate clean. Now, that's apocalyptic. Paul did not write in an apocalyptic style because Paul didn't see that. Didn't believe that the world was so bad that only God's intervention could save us. He writes a lot about what you should be doing. In apocalyptic literature, that's not it. This is apocalyptic. That the only hope we have after all this is God coming down and doing what?
Straighten things out.
Knocking some heads together, wiping the slate clean and starting over. That's apocalyptic. That's the apocalyptic style. It's for hopeless people. Therefore, I don't think apocalyptic speaks real well to us. Because I don't think we're at that point. Maybe Dietrich Bonhoeffer was, as he was sitting in a concentration camp, only God could straighten it out. But I'm not sure we're there. We're more like Paul.
It's so hard to really believe how people can treat each other.
Yeah.
Like those concentration camps and
what
they did to them. How anybody can, I just don't understand. I really don't.
Human beings have a great capacity for love
and cruelty.
And that's what's said. Anyway, so he's getting into apocalyptic. All this business with suffering, because that's what your only hope. You're not going to get out of suffering yourself. The only hope is for God to intervene. And the sun being those are images that you see all over the place. In in Greek apocalyptic stuff, in Hebrew, Daniel is apocalyptic. That's an apocalyptic style. At least the last, after chapter 4 is apocalyptic. All right, so and the Son of Man will be coming in, when all of this happens, Son of Man is going to be coming in the clouds. Now we say, oh, he must be coming out. Well, cloud represents, the kavod in Hebrew is translated cloud. It's also translated glory. And so when he comes in the cloud, that's a symbol of him coming in
Great power
and glory and power. That's why the cloud led the children of Israel through the wilderness, a pillar of cloud, because that's the glory of God. So he's going to be coming in glory. What does that mean? Physical clouds? Maybe, but doesn't have to be. So again, you don't want to rationalize something that's apocalyptic. And what is he going to do with this? Because God is doing what? He is cleaning house, right? And what is he going to be doing? He's sending his angels out. And what are the angels going to do?
Get his people.
Okay,
Yeah.
gathering his people. Now, you read this, you say, okay, in the world, bad things are happening. With you, bad things are happening, but understand, there may be a time when things get so bad, God's going to clean house. And so the people are thinking, well, that may be next Tuesday, because things are pretty tough. And so what does Jesus say about this coming? What does he say? He gives another parable, right?
It's just a sign.
Okay, it's a sign. The season, there are seasons for this, there are seasons for other things. A fig tree, the season, the season will come. He also says something really interesting, which tells us maybe what Mark expected. What does he say in verse 30?
The generation wouldn't pass away that saw that.
There's not, the generation here won't pass away until this happens, which may tell you, especially when you combine it with the fact that there's no appearances of Jesus in Mark after the resurrection, may indicate that Mark expected the end to come pretty soon. Not predicting, but he kind of thought it was going to be coming soon. That's not a shock. Paul did too. That's in the first letter to the Thessalonians. The Thessalonians are saying, look, Christians are dying. They aren't supposed to die. Jesus is supposed to come back. And Paul said, well, I understand, they're dying, but they're going to be the first ones. Don't worry about it. You're going to be fine. God's going to take you. That was how many? 2,000 years ago? Give or take 50 years. So it hadn't happened yet. But it seems like maybe Mark expected it to happen pretty soon. But anyway.
He's just like everybody here. You would think it's going to come, these signs are happening.
That's right. That's right. But the key, just after saying that, which is kind of interesting, what then does he say?
Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words
Won't fail. And then
nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
Nobody
Knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows. Nobody knows the day. Nobody knows the hour. Now,
Not even the angels. That's what
not
I
even the angels. Not even
The Son.
the Son doesn't know. Only the Father. Only the Father knows.
Do you think that's because unless the end is cut short, there'll be no flesh left alive? You know what I'm saying? It depends on how bad we get.
Well,
because I don't know.
What has he already said? Don't
Look for signs.
Don't look for signs. Don't look for signs. Because it's a waste of energy.
Exactly.
It's a waste of energy. Nobody knows. Now, I heard a preacher, and I think I was watching it on TV or something, and he said, says nobody knows the day and hour, but you can know the month and year. I just went like this.
We've had those so many times now, the month and year.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's what we need. That's exactly what we need.
2012, and it didn't happen.
Yeah. That's the last time I sell everything I own.
Yeah. And then about what year was it about the computers?
Oh, Y2K.
I did. That was
Ooh.
2000.
Yeah, what I was looking for
Yeah,
that
2000.
word, yeah.
Well, yeah, with those Mayans, that Mayan calendar.
Yeah, December,
You know,
was it December 2012?
Yeah.
It just, the Mayan calendar just stopped.
And I remember seeing a cartoon on that, and it's Mayan there.
Well,
And
they made the movie 2012.
Oh yeah. Two Mayans talking, and one says to the other one, he says, "Why did you end the calendar in 2012? Does it mean the world's going to end?" And he said, "Ran out of room on the rock." Ran out of room. Yeah, I don't know. But that's what Jesus is saying. Don't get gummed up with this stuff, which tells you Mark's church must be getting what? Gummed up with this.
Distracted.
Wonderful
Focus
word.
on all these things here.
That's right.
You're not looking at
That's
God.
right. You're not looking at God, and you're not looking, because what did he say? Everything, the two most important commandments in the law?
Love God.
Love God, love neighbor. Didn't say anything
But
about...
make sure you watch for the signs.
Yeah, watch for... It doesn't say anything about watching for the signs. It says love God, and anything that distracts you from doing that is a distraction. Maybe a satanic distraction, but certainly a distraction. So he says, don't worry about it. 2 bewares. Beware when you look at the world. Beware when you look at yourself. 3rd beware in verse 33. And what is the 3rd beware?
You don't know when it's coming.
You don't know, but beware. You don't know when it's coming.
But be ready.
Yeah,
But
be alert.
But be alert.
Be ready.
Be alert. Because if you don't know when it's coming, it could be tomorrow.
Yeah.
And it could be 1,000 years from tomorrow. But you need to be ready. And then he gives a little parable, right? And what is the little parable? About being ready?
You gotta keep watching.
Master leaves on the trip. Puts
You
his...
gotta be ready for when he comes.
That's right. That's right. And you don't know when he's coming back. This is every teen comedy. When the parents leave the teens at home, what do the teens do?
Somebody's gonna
Throw a big party,
Yeah.
right? Jesus is saying, don't throw a party. Don't try to get into your parents' liquor cabinet. Don't do it. Because what? They could show up. They could come back. And you're going to get caught. And if you get caught and you're not prepared, that ain't good. That ain't good.
That's like not having enough oil for your lamp.
Yeah, a good parable in the Gospel of Matthew. That Matthew taught, same sort of thing. Not being ready. Only it's the Matthew in 25. Yeah, the same sort of thing. You got to be ready. You got to be ready. And that's what Mark is saying. And so chapter 13 is this sort of little inclusive thing dealing with the future. What is the bottom line? What does Jesus and Mark want us to take away from chapter 13?
Things are going to go on just like they always have until it's time for Jesus to return.
Yep. And
Be ready.
be ready. Be ready. Don't get distracted. Be ready. Do what you are called to do. And what are we called to do?
Watch.
No, love God.
Love
Yeah,
God.
love neighbor, yes.
Love neighbor.
But I was right
Yes.
into this thing.
Right, watch. That's right.
Yes.
And that's how we watch. We love God, we love neighbor. Do that. You're going to be fine. You'll be ready. If that's where your focus is, you'll be fine. Okay. Next week we're going to look at chapter 14. And the ball's going to start rolling in 14. Because to this time, everything's been okay. Now things are going to seem like, and if you read it and you say, man, things seem like it's getting out of control, that's good. I think that's what Mark wants you to feel. Because things aren't going to get out of control. And even out of control for Jesus. That Jesus is going to hit a point where it seems like things are moving really fast for him. Faster than he expected. And that's why we're going to have him pray something really interesting on the Mount of Olives. Which is kind of a surprise. A little bit. Well, we know it because we've seen it before, but it's kind of interesting.
The human side of Jesus doesn't want to have to go through all of that.
You know,
But he
it-
doesn't because he loves his flow.
Yep. If we want to, and that's why I love the fact that we got 4 Gospels. If we want to see the humanity of Jesus, look at the Gospel of Mark. Look at the Gospel of Mark. I mean, remember in Mark, Jesus was in places, couldn't perform miracles. You know, in his hometown, he says couldn't perform miracles.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus gets mad in Mark. You know, Jesus, and we get this, and at the crucifixion, you know, he says, my God, why have you forsaken me?
Yeah.
So we see the humanity of Jesus in Mark,
yes.
and that's really important for us to see. But we also need to see his divinity. And that's why we turn to the Gospel of John. And John, we've got Jesus saying he's the Son of God in chapter 2. You know, he says, the Father and I are one. He'd never say anything like that in Mark, but he says it in John. I think we need both. You know, that Jesus was human, therefore experienced the depth of human pain. He was also divine. Therefore he controls the destiny of the universe. You know, our lives are in his hands, therefore we can feel comfort. Both are important to know, but I'm not sure you could put them both together in one story without it becoming weird, you know, becoming kind of an odd.
I find
Something
it
odd.
encouraging to know that the emotions that I go through, Jesus went through also. And, you know, the emotions themselves are not wrong. It's how you deal with those emotions that it's either a godly way or a man way. And so being able to see that Jesus didn't want to die, I got that feeling. You know, he didn't want them just desecrating the temple, so he threw a fit. Well, I threw a fit. And yet, it didn't disqualify him.
No.
And so therefore, it gives me hope that when I go off on this tangent, that as long as I submit it back to God and get it focused properly onto him rather than the distraction, life is all good.
And as a matter of fact, not only did it not disqualify him, I think for Mark it made him. You know, that's where he showed himself to be Son of God, in experiencing that depth of human pain. That's the Son of God is the Son of Man. It's interesting when we look at that prayer at Gethsemane, because he'll say, "Let this cup pass. I don't want to die.
If it can.
Please let it pass."
Yeah.
In John, he prays, and in John it says, "Father, I could say to you, let this cup pass, but I'm not, because I know this is what I need to do." And it's almost, I think John did know Mark. I think John did know Mark, and I think that's very intentional. That he was saying, you know, this Jesus is in control. You know, that's why in John he carries the cross. John even says he carried the cross by himself. You know, the other 3, Simon of Cyrene carries the cross for him. In John, he does it all himself. When he's arrested in John, everybody falls on the ground. He allows himself to be arrested. John's a whole different presentation of who Jesus is, but both of them are necessary, because you can't have faith in somebody who has no control. And John, he has control. But can you have faith in someone who can't identify with you? In Mark, he can identify with us.
I think it also gives us every facet of God.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times we focus on just his healing or just, you know, his comfort without seeing every part of him.
Yeah.
You know, we are to imitate him. So if we only have one place where we imitate, we're not doing a good job of showing
Right.
Jesus. So we have to know the whole Jesus to be able to, you know, show others him.
I had a friend when I was in seminary who had, and then I'm gonna let you, we'll say a prayer, we'll let you go. He had cerebral palsy, and his name was Duncan. And we were sitting, I remember we were sitting in Rice Hall, which was sort of where you hung out. And Duncan was there, and somebody asked him, "Duncan, have you ever," this was in the 80s, you know, Have you ever thought about going to, when Jim Baker was real popular, I mean, he was making money hand over fist, and he was healing folks all over. Have you ever thought about going to a faith healer? And I remember Duncan saying, why would I do that? He said, I'll have a ministry you will never have. Because people who are in my condition can come to me and I can look them in the eye and say, I know what you're feeling. I know what you're feeling. You won't be able to do that. You might understand how they're feeling, intellectualize it, but I know what they're feeling because I felt it myself. And that becomes so important with the Jesus in Mark. He knows what we're feeling. And I think, although there's no linguistic reason to believe it, what Mark's gospel coordinates with the letter to the Hebrews, I think, really, really well. Because in the letter to the Hebrews, the writer, and we don't know who the writer is, but in the letter of the Hebrews, one of the points he makes is we have a high priest that can identify with us. Mm-hmm. And so when you go to God in prayer, you're not praying to somebody who intellectually understands what you're going through or is, omniscient and understands all things. You're going to somebody who's felt it. And that's what I've had conversation with my Muslim friends, that when you pray to Allah, God, your God as you see him, intellectually understands what you're going through. And that's important because God knows all things. When I go to my God in prayer, as I see God, he's actually experienced what I've experienced. And I said, that makes a difference to me. It makes a difference to me because he knows my brokenness and pain because he experienced it himself. And
It's heart knowledge instead of head knowledge.
It's almost an existential knowledge. It was something that they experienced.
My dog swallows too.
She loves it. Okay, thank you, Coco. On that note, yeah. When I left home today, there was a bottle underneath, although it was one of Debbie's bottles and it wasn't water. I want to talk about that. That's a burden I have to carry. It was a water bottle, but it was underneath a chair. And she could see it, and she looked under it and was trying to get it, but couldn't get it. So I got my hand and took it. No, of course she's not spoiled. Where is it? Oh. All right, Coco, we're going to pray, so I'm going to take the bottle away from you for a minute. Yes, it'll be here. We'll play with it later. Okay? We'll play here. Come here. Yes, that's good. Okay. Let's have a word of prayer. Lord God, thank you. Thank you for giving us your word. Thank you for ensuring our future. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to live without fear. Now, help us not become distracted. And there's a lot of things that can distract us, one of which can be despair over the direction the world is heading. Help us to avoid having our focus distracted in that way. Instead, enable us to continue to love you as best we can, but also help us to love one another as we would want to be loved ourselves. Help us to do that because that's what we've been called to do. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So, thank you.